Max Muller Bhavan, Chennai since 2014. He has taken up water and river ecology as a major focus for Indo-German cultural collaboration. Mukund Padmanabhan, he's the editor of The Hindu. He's interested in and has written about politics, legal affairs, and literature. Parvati Nair, she's a multidisciplinary artist who engages with external and internal spaces, the environment, and the various philosophical inhabitations. She's also a writer and a poet. Artist and curator Ravi Agarwal, he's the founder of the NGO Toxic Links and has pioneered work in waste and chemicals in India. He has led campaigns for Delhi's Ridge Forest and the river Yamuna. They will be in conversation with T.M. Krishna. He's a vocalist in the Carnatic tradition. He has started and is involved in many organizations whose work is spread across the whole spectrum of music and culture. Over to you.
We are all here because of this fabulous book, Embrace Our Rivers, and Helmut will speak more about how it came about and the history. Just like to say a few words. One is most people who live in the city of Chennai don't know we're a city of rivers. We think of ourselves as a city of drainage systems and filth. There are actually 3 rivers, not 2.
Broken drainage systems.
Yes, broken drainage systems. So most of us know the Kuam. I mean, if you didn't, there's a problem. The Adyar River. And most people don't know there's a 3rd river towards North Chennai called Kosas Talayar. So this is a city of 3 rivers. The only thing we discuss is we talk about the city as a city of drought. But this city has shown us that that's not true. We are a city of floods. We are a city of rain. We are also a city of a drought. So this is what we are as a city. And we are a city that is just building, rubbishing, throwing, consuming at a rate which is very difficult to digest. And we are only emblematic of what is happening to civilization at large everywhere else. And therefore, this book is a very important book because it's the intersection of art, politics, society, the public, the private, and looks at how you can engage creatively with the ugliness within ourselves and the possibility of beauty that exists within ourselves. And I say within ourselves specifically and not externalize it, because this is a problem of discovering this within ourselves as individuals, as collectives, as artists, as the political, as communities. And I think this was a very important step that was taken in trying to bring the discourse of water, the complexity of discourse of water, the complexity of development, and a very important facet of that, which is marginalization, into public discourse. I'll stop there and I'll let Helmut first speak about Embrace Our Rivers, and then we'll move from there.
Okay, you promised to ask me a question, as you didn't ask it. It's okay. He wanted to ask me why me as an outsider, something like that.
Yeah, I was just asking, what is a German guy doing here with water in Chennai?
Right. So
that's what I wanted to ask him, but that's fine.
That's great. I just wanted to say I'm not an outsider because obviously climate change is here. It is here and now, and we are all affected by it in the same way. Water scarcity, the water crisis is here and now, and we all have to do something. So I think the question is not so much, not at all, because I provoke that only because I'm asked that question usually. And it's not that. We should ask everybody here inside, and we should ask ourselves, but then also, of course, ask the community and the policymakers and everybody else why these topics are not first priority, but maybe in Germany, I would say number 5, number 8, etc. So we can think about that. When I came here, I thought, you know, you had this discussion now in the other room there in the showplace, where somebody said that in principle culture is a bad word, etc. I'm the director of the Cultural Institute, so I thought maybe it's not such a bad word. Anyway, to make it even better, in 2015, in March, and I insist on that date because that was about half a year before the floods came, and where, even in the Hindu, that has done a lot afterwards, and many other papers, you could not read a lot about the problems. Yeah? So at that time, coming to India and with my experience about international cooperation and communication, etc. So what is useful? And it was obvious that we had to do something about a topic that is really not only at our heart, but really a problem where we can read every day that latest maybe in 2030 or 2040, we will, you know, what we are projecting for next year, or for this summer, better said, it's already next year, that we have even less water. That will increase and increase, and in 2030 maybe we have only half of the water available, but many more people who need that water. So we are really in a mess already now, and we all have to do something about it. So very shortly said, if you put, yeah, it's okay. You don't see a lot of the slides here anyway. I thought this is a bit bigger. It doesn't matter. So we took it up as a cultural institute. And of course, as a cultural institute, to cut me short if I speak too long, you do that, please. Of course, we are not taking this up from a scientific or from a technological or whatever point of view, but we are looking at it from the cultural point of view. We are trying to bring people from all different walks of life together and see all the multi-perspectives in it. We try to create a certain new dialogue about this topic in the society, and there, of course, the media, the press, and all then come in, etc. So this is what we did, taking it up as a cultural institute. And then, of course, you know, water nowadays, that's perhaps part of the problem. It's more seen as a commodity, as a resource or whatever. If we look at it in all its cultural, spiritual, emotional, etc. depths, it's simply completely different. So all this, we have to think about it. And then, of course, if we, in public, if we see it always in the negative way, then maybe we're psychologically, we have a barrier to act upon.
Can I take it from there? The whole idea, I'm going to move to Parvati here. He makes an interesting point towards the end, which I'm going to pick on and hand it over to you. The idea of seeing it negatively. I find it very problematic, that statement, fundamentally. Because it first depends on who's looking at it, and depends on the idea of negativity, depends on where you live, it depends on what you consume, it depends whether you live right next to the Kuam every day, and you have to fish in the Kosasthalya River. So negative and positive becomes a very, very tricky platform. Similarly, the whole idea of beauty and the ugliness. And so I want you to talk about your work specifically for this project and try and ruminate about this, the whole idea, because I know you've used garbage. Yes, so that itself becomes a very interesting metaphor to beauty, column, design, garbage, the positive, the negative. What are we actually addressing? How are you problematizing it, if you can?
Thank you, Krishna. Well, there are two ways of doing this. One, I had prepared slides thinking that people here may not, let's not assume that people have come to the Damned Art Project or have necessarily read the book. So it was going to be a sort of personal journey of how I was involved with the project and how it sort of shape-shifted over 3 years, because I was part of the project right from the start. But let me talk, and if you will give me leave, I will show the slides after, because I think it is nice for people to see though I write, I do believe that, pictures have their own power. So, in my case, it was a journey which had multiple beginnings. One, I suppose, was a fascination with water, that sort of mysterious, shape-shifting substance that's born when the stars are born, and it's been a through thread through my work right from the beginning. And another beginning, perhaps, is, as Krishna says, I live beside the Coombe. I look out every morning and see this toxic river in flow every day. And another beginning was becoming part of the water program with the Goethe Institute. And one of the things that it did was it allowed me to go with a bunch of like-minded but very diverse people, Ravi included, to study water management in the Netherlands and in Germany. One of the projects we saw there was something called Make Room for the River Wall, where a river flooding was not dealt with in seeing how do we control the river, but how do we make room for the river. And over 40 people who lived there, they were they were relocated, and another channel was dug for the river. This for me was, it was wonderful because by this stage I think I'd lost my belief in the power of dialogue to change anything. But here were people who really didn't want to move their houses, but their point of view was shifted, not because they were forced to do it, but because of a process of dialogue, they saw a larger good. The other thing that we experienced, and I'm truncating this, is that we saw this public art exhibition, the Emscher Kunst, by the river Emscher, which was a way of allowing the people to deal with the river and with public art as the river was being restored. We came back, and slides are jumping, and I'm not entirely sure why, but it's not important. We sort of then started thinking, how do we do something for the Coombe? And in response to what you were saying, I think for me it was very strongly the sense of how can a river re-enter the imagination unless we create a different thought for the river? So we know a lot about the 72-kilometer river, which is, toxic, and it's not perennial, nothing can live in it. But as we were kind of exploring the river and we came to the mouth of the river, which is where this public art show was to be, I thought, where does the river begin? What is the source of the river? I spoke to some historians and went with Padmapriya Bhaskaran to trace the real and the mythical source of the river. And to my, I was so surprised to find that there is a Coombe Purana, that there was a time when people said if you had a bath in the river, it would purify you of your sins, that Shiva was supposed to have struck the ground and water flowed out and became the Coombe. So there was all this sort of thinking around the river, and I visited several temples associated with the river at the Coombe village in the Thiruvallur district. And when I came back and again processed this trip, what remained in my mind was the presence of columns. At the temple, at the fisherman's house, everywhere. This ubiquitous drawing of dots and lines was there everywhere to welcome you in. And I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to do a column for the Coombe? It was, in a sense, an extension of my practice because I do with dots and lines, and here was this flow drawing, which has this wonderful history. It's so quintessentially Chennai. And it's, it cuts through wealth. It could be outside a bank for an opening, but outside the humblest bank employee's home. But I wanted this to be a column for the Coombe that would speak of the present and the future of the Coombe. So I spoke to some researchers about the kind of algae found in the Coombe. So this was going to be, and then I worked with a ceramicist to make this algae in three-dimensional form, and then with a column expert to use this very undulating line of pulleys, which are dots, and to make this pulley column for the Coombe. And there was both diatoms, which are sort of which don't live in the river because it's too polluted, but this was going to be near the mouth of the sea. And diatoms, you may not know, give us 20% of the oxygen we breathe because they fix oxygen. So there were going to be diatoms as the pulleys and the algae as the column. But this project was not to be. And in the meantime, I had worked with the second river of Chennai. Again, lots of people don't know that there are 3 rivers in Chennai. Along with Niti, we had gone to see the Kosas Taliyar and the Ennore Creek. And I had done a project, a solo called Haunted by Waters, which Ravi had come to. And so when Ravi and Florian and Helmut decided that we were not going to let the project die, we were going to do the dammed art project, I thought, well, I've dealt with 2 of Chennai's rivers. Let me deal with the 3rd, which is the Adyar River. And I went there, and what I saw was garbage. What the river had thrown out onto the banks of the river was garbage, but admittedly, we put it there in the first place. So it sort of organically grew with the support of the curators and so on, that I would do a column out of garbage, the same column, but it would be done with garbage and with the things that were put in. And again, volunteers, I went with volunteers, over 40 volunteers over a month, to collect the garbage and then sort it out. And as you can see, the project over these 3 years involved so many different kinds of people and expertise, and it became something that I think grew out of Chennai and being here. And so we created this giant column with the help of a bunch of architects who kind of created this platform for me. And you can see the things that went in: the slippers, the bottles, the light bulbs, the Amritanjan, and sort of more pernicious objects like syringes and, toys like the toy gun and so on. So this was a column for the River Adyar, but really for the rivers in general. And I also had a nod to the original one, the ceramic pieces and the drawings, and a film called By the Mouth of the River, which traced the life of a fisherman by the mouth of the river. And I think sort of it makes me feel that this journey has multiple, not endings, but yes, endings, in that one was realizing this project. One was I did another project with trash called The Wave, based on the Hokusai wave, where I asked Chennaites deliberately to give me their trash to make this object. And I think another ending is the book we hold in our hand, the heft and the weight of it. Because the art does, it's an installation, it goes, but the book is something else that comes out again into the public realm and has another life and another discourse, and all of you sitting here and Krishna here to provoke. Thank you.
Thank you. Ravi, just taking off from the whole idea of a public discourse in politics, in environment, through the medium of art and curation. So first, specifically on this project, is when you start beginning to think of a curation that has so many different conversations to it, how do you, first of all, approach it? Is there an end you're looking at in terms of what you want to see at the end? Or how does one create, because this whole idea of art in public space is something that I want you to address in terms of the politics of it, in terms of what it does, in terms of who it addresses. Is there an audience? Are you looking at an audience when you curate? If this had happened where it's supposed to happen, hypothetically, is there an audience? Who's the audience?
So that's a lot of questions. Sorry, I'll try and be brief. When Helmut first invited me to curate...
I'm not used to moderating, that's why.
No, that's completely you have the prerogative of asking many questions, but I'll try and address some of them. So Helmut first invited me to curate, but it's been, when he invited me, I said yes because I've had some history of looking at water and of the ideas of ecology and nature for some time now, both as an activist but also as somebody who's investigating ideas around what constitutes nature. And so I don't live in Chennai, so everything I learned about the rivers was after he invited me. But I mean, I don't want to talk about what's happening to the water in the country because we know the data. We know that every river is polluted. We know we are stopping abstracting a lot of water for irrigation. We know we're not replacing it. We know that we don't think of river basins, though we live in river basins. The whole landscape is just multiple river basins. So we think of one river, but the river has many, many connectivities. It's a network of water, basically, we're talking about. It's part of the hydrological cycle of a global planetary cycle. And we have somehow limited ourselves to thinking of rivers as usage. And one of the questions is, why is water an idea of usage? And we investigate the question is that it goes deep down to what I'm interested in is how the separation of nature or water is something which we look upon as one homogeneous entity. Actually, it is divided. It is nature and culture nature is culture. We have created nature in our own image, in a sense that depending on your social hierarchy, it changes. So it appears completely different to somebody from a different caste, which you address a lot, or from a different class. And we seem to find one answer to all these things. So this whole investigation that it is, you cannot, how do you bring these multiple ideas of rethinking what an element like water is? That it is constituted in the social hierarchy of, or the social structures of human social structures. And we have constituted that as something. And hence, when we try and approach for solutions for that, we have solutions which are actually, which have emerged from Europe. Somebody asked me, somebody said what you saw in Europe. Europe has had a disastrous history of looking at river systems. They destroyed the Rhine in the mid-19th century, and only now they've started trying to recover it. Because they see rivers or water as completely for transport, of drinking, of irrigation. But these are all major biosystems. And part of the curatorial intent was how to evoke relationships which are very complex relationships back in the public realm. And I say back because these are lived relationships even today. We just seem not to want to think about them. Different people have different relationships with the river. And these are all mired in culture and in politics as well. So if you try and re-evoke those relationships, it's a possibility that we might rethink what water really means, in a sense. And that there is no single way of thinking about it. And how we have destroyed, through some kind of feudal state system of centralized water, or creating big dams, or appropriating water for river systems for particular kind of usages. It's very much a class and caste question as well, in a sense. So I'm interested in this. When we think of climate change, for example, we think of this planetary tipping point, this planetary problem. But on the ground, the problem is much more complex. When we think of the Anthropocene, we think of this human species which have caused this planetary tipping point. It's not true. Probably 5% of the human species has caused the planetary tipping point. Most people are just bearing the consequences of what's done. If you go and visit fishing villages, and I've worked with a fishing village in Pondicherry for many years, you find that the smallest fishermen cannot make a living anymore. The beach is disappearing because somebody else far away has built a port, or somebody has stopped the river from bringing the sand in, and the person really does not know why it's happening. So it's a question which is now at multiple levels, and we should not think that we can find one great meta solution to this. It's a solution which lies in recognizing our own relationship to something, and not to romanticize something called the river outside the very complex everyday relationships people have with it. And that is what is called nature. Nature is not one thing. The river is not one thing. And secondly, we seem to think that rivers around the country are rivers. They're not. Every river has a different ecosystem. They're all very differently flowing. They have a different set of biodiversity and flows, and they have a different set of people living around them who have different kind of relationships with them. To bring this complexity back, I think is the only way we're going to go out of what we call the ecological crisis, because I think the crisis exists because we are thinking of it as one kind of crisis. It's a crisis of human society, I think.
Thank you. Again, taking off from what you said, I'm coming to Mukund, and of course going to ask you a political question. But first of all, whenever we speak about the rivers, especially Coombe, all we read in the Hindu or any paper is beautification project. We're going to beautify the Coombe. We're going to build walkways where people can jog. We're going to plant, say, identical looking little shrubs that align. Well, none of them has happened, that is one thing. But this whole notion of beautification is the only way, not just our state, in a larger sense, we seem to approach this idea. And here you have a project that was supposed to happen right at the Kuam, an art project that was going to raise questions, that had the backing of not even being Indian, if I may say so. Usually you have slightly more power than we do. But, but he figured he didn't, but that's a different thing altogether. And then you have this government that tosses this up for 2 years and finally pretty much tells them, sorry boss, you can't do any of this. This is really problematic. One is the political attitude, both in their own sense of trying to deal with this issue of the Kuam or whatever. They think it's a cleaning project and cementing project. And second is definitely a restriction of creative space here, of engaging politically as a creative, as a group of creative people. And I want you to address that issue.
Oh, all right. Yeah, but before I do that, I just want to address the sort of existential question that I've been asking myself, which is exactly what am I doing in a panel like this? And I tried to ask the organizers this when I was invited to take part, and I was told Helmut ordered it. So, you know, so he's much more than just.
I told you he has more power. I mean,
I'm not so sure. Anyway, I'll just come to this in a kind of roundabout fashion, if you like. My only connection, I think, there is a connection some way, something that Helmut doesn't know about. When I came to Chennai in the early 90s, mid 90s, I was a part of a group called the Waterways Action Monitoring Program, which very infelicitously was, short formed as WAMP. But yeah, so, and the group did things like record sewage outfalls in various places, and we found that many large establishments in Chennai, government houses, sometimes clubs, others, let untreated sewage into the waterways. And we did it for 4 waterways, the Adyar, the Kuam, the Buckingham Canal, and the Oteri Nala. And there was data collected, presented to the government and stuff like that, walks organized. And I just think back, and this was, obviously you're younger then, a little more filled with hope. What has changed since then? And look around you, and very little has. And I think that's one thing that sort of strikes me as I go along. And we weren't ambitious enough to do what Helmut does, because what he's done is, he planned an exhibition where it didn't work out, as you know. I'm not surprised it didn't. I've been through that book, and this was not just public art. It was like, okay, I'm doing protest art in your space. And so, knowing governments, it's sad that it didn't go through. But I'm not surprised it didn't go through. And what he did was the next big thing, which is like, conduct a sort of meta art show. But just coming to a couple of things that you said, 2 things seems to be happening now, which, they sort of open up sort of small window of hope, if you like. But at the other hand, I'm not at all sure about the way they're going about this. For the first time, you have a sort of integrated waterways restoration project. I have never, since 1992, seen anything, and I'm not saying it's a good thing the way they're going about it, anything so comprehensive as this, at least going on. We're talking about setting up of modular treatment plants along the waterways. They're talking about interceptor channels. They're talking even about a baby canal that runs through, which in the lean seasons takes care of stuff. And of course, they're talking about walkways, beautification, so on. But I find some of this rather odd. For one, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's now being fenced off. And you talk to officials, there are actually walls being created now in the places that the Kuam is you've seen a lot of movement between Napier Bridge and up to a point now at Chetpat and beyond. You talk to officials, and then they say, okay, we've done some rehabilitation, which is another political issue, and the way that's done, and we can come to that later. But we're too scared if we don't do this, the entire thing will, backtrack and people will start coming in. And then there's the idea, in the long term, if we want to let people in, we can just have a door, and then we can create all these walkways and so on that are being planned. The other thing that is, I think, significant is that, makes me wonder actually, how much of this interest in the Kuam that you've seen lately, and Helmut, you've talked to me about people being moved and resettled and so on. Yeah, exactly. How much of this is got to do with this renewed interest in this Chennai-Madurai elevated expressway, which is actually going to be built on the banks of the Kuam? That's one. The second thing I think which has spurred, and this spurred them to act, is the floods. The floods of 2015, I think, did rattle some people in government. So we know that, I mean, if you're going to use EHCA's, little bit on causation in history, where it makes a difference between, something that is immediate and something that is precipitating and something that is long term. We know that the immediate cause of the floods were, the sudden opening of the sluice gates. They should have opened it in stages, and there was a communication issue, and they opened it, and that was the cause of the floods. But we also know that the long-term problem was siltation and blocked stormwater drains and all of that, which just multiplied the force of the misery, and I think it ended up in many more people dying and so on. So there has been, in some parts, a great deal of desilting, which could have happened in 1992. We had the technology for that. So I think this is happening as well. Now, where this will go, how pretty it's going to be, whether it is going to be open for all, which is what your art project was all about, the way it was curated, I'm not so sure. But thinking back to 1992, I certainly see a little more interest in government than there is now. But I think, it needs an expert to be able to say what will happen. And they're not giving you a time frame. You ask them, all right, what's the time frame? Just 3 days back, the National Green Tribunal served the government with a sure cause notice, performance notice, saying, why can't you pay 10 crores? Because you're not giving us a timeline. I think in December, 2 crore fine the NGT slapped on the PWD for the Kuam and the Adyar. So this has been happening as well. But I'll just end with one thing, that I think the reason, I don't know, why there isn't as much interest among the middle class and among people like us, I think, in this issue of water, is that we're able, I think, to get access to clean water elsewhere. We can get it in bottles, we can get it elsewhere. Take air. Look at the amount of column space devoted to the bad air in North India, which every winter in the last few years. I mean, it's amazing the way television channels and the press covers it. You can't escape air, not even by closing your bedroom window. And I think that's the reason. So I think the fact that we can shut ourselves off makes us a little less sensitive to the whole issue. And I think that public pressure is not as strong for water as it is with air. Thanks.
You want to respond, Helmut?
Look, what I wanted to say is, you have, on the one hand side, you have the technological design project to change something. But we know that 50%, maybe 60 or 80% of it is governance. And that is where I want to involve or integrate art and culture and communication and the participation of people, because what is lacking everywhere, but especially maybe also in the present political situation, is a good relationship, let's say, between the policy making, which is usually a top-down process, and then, of course, the bottom-up of whom you make participate. That's one point, I think, which has gone quite well in Germany, and where I see a certain a positive role of public art to play. But our role as society and as a cultural institute is not limited to an art event. It's very important to have the public art event with its on-site specificities, with the knowledge or the imagination of the artists, but there is much more in it. And if we have a look once more at one or two other places, one was mentioned before, the Emscher in Germany, where now you have maybe every 3 years you have 4 lakh people, 400,000 people, all going along and seeing the artworks, which are not, they're all on-site specific. That means they are all creating a dialogue between the artist and the artwork with his or her research on this specific urban or non-urban space. So what I want to say, I would like to quote one last example, which is Seoul, where they have blown off the whole concrete part, 10 kilometers in town, to bring the river back to the town. And personally, I think that would be the only good solution for the Buckingham Canal in Chennai. But I don't know if you want to publish that. But it's true. Huh? We speak of the, internationally, statistics say that the people who live on a river in a slum, they are responsible. Sorry for these statistics. They are responsible 0.14% for the pollution of the same river.
Can I just take off from
Huh?
that? I want to take. I was going to say something similar, and maybe Ravi, not just Chennai, but you can talk about this in general also. The reason I raised the beautification issue is also to bring the human coefficient in that conversation, because in every city, including Chennai, they just pick up people who have lived for generations right at the banks of the river, and completely displace them, take away their livelihood, take away their connection with workplace, with home, the whole emotional idea of belonging, and put them in places like in Chennai, in place in Semangeri or somewhere. And those places then become very problematic, because they are bringing people of very different cultures together, and that becomes a sociological complexity. And then you stigmatize people living in Semangeri as being goons and rowdies and drug addicts. I mean, the whole thing is just disgusting that we could function like that as a society. And that's why when we say beautification, what are we saying? We are saying this should look nice to the middle class. And this is a middle class, like Mukund very rightly pointed, very rarely actually engages with the issue of this river. And then between rivers, just look at the discrimination. Kuam is always discussed. Why is Kosasthalayar not discussed? Simply because it's not Chennai. It's not part of what we call Chennai. It's not the driveway where the governor or the chief minister or the prime minister are going to take. And there you have a port, Kamarajar Port. You have power plants, dumping fly ash everywhere. You have her whole ecosystem destroyed, the livelihood of the fisher folk completely demolished. All this is happening every day as we speak today. So one is, even the river that we believe we want to save, but we are saving, we are destroying lives and not actually understanding the socio-cultural ecology. And then between rivers, we have a hierarchy on what we prioritize as what we want to look beautiful. I just want to talk about this. I just gave you Chennai as an example. I'm sure there are examples across, but just talk about that. Ganga, for example, Ganga, yeah.
That's quite common, actually. We do it because we can. Some of us can do it. So all these projects are creating more exclusions, not inclusion. We talk of nature as something which is for everybody, but all these projects, firstly, you should investigate how much money they cost and who are they displacing from those places. So these are actually just enforcing the problems of the past. We are doing more wrong what we've already done. And we're not recovering the river. We're just recovering space for certain, it's a question of whose city is it, whose river it is. And I think that question, to answer that, you have to think of something called ecological democracy. What does that really mean? Do we even understand, do we even know what that means? And are we willing to act towards that? And all over the country, people who are living, firstly, people who are living off the rivers, as the cities have grown, because they're living off the rivers, because they're equivalent to waste. You throw the waste on the rivers, and the poor live on the rivers. And the cities grow, and you want the land reclaimed. So then you displace the poor, and you put the waste somewhere else. So this is just a reclamation for a certain kind of imagery of what you want to take it back for. And it is deeply, deeply problematic. But the problem lies even more. That's what I just said in the first, that what we are doing with the river is essentially reflecting who we are as a society. And till we really investigate it, we also talk of, we don't talk of, for example, gender and caste. Two things, two categories which are ignored when we talk of people. Because who bears the burden of not getting water? Who spends most time getting water in the slum? It's a woman. And about caste as well, who gets thrown out the first? You know, why does the fisherman get thrown out the first? So there is a deep problem, and we haven't learned to, well, metaphorically shut the tap. I'll give you a small example. It doesn't do with water, we do with plastics, because everybody says recycle plastic. Today we are producing about 355 million tons of plastic globally, and we're recycling less than 9% of it. And everybody says separate and recycle. Between now and 2050, there'll be $200 billion fresh investments into plastics because of shale oil. And if you extrapolate all the efforts till 2050, we'll still be 60% short of recycling. Somehow we're saying that we're not going the route of what's really happening. These are large imaginations of what you consider as nature, as aesthetic and beauty, not as a lived landscape. And I think it has a lot to do with social power and capital as well.
Thank you. How much time do we have? 15 minutes, so that's lovely. So I have a question here for Parvati. Is this some elitist project? I'm being asked to provoke, so I'm going to try. So, you know, you make this book, and, you know, all of us, bunch of us here just feel very good having this conversation, and then we'll go back. An elitist project, just to clarify, bunch of people belonging to a certain class and a certain upper section of society who suddenly find engaged in the issue.
Yeah.
No. Let me finish. No, I'm saying what I want to say. Yes, that's what I'm coming to. Ravi, you just picked it off. I was going to say. So the way it's funded, you know, the organization that does it, and so the question is, one, yes, you do understand the space, you do understand the problem, and nobody is, I think, denying the sensitivity that goes into the artist's work. But the question is, how much continuity is there in the conversation with the community living there? How much did the community living there participate in the activity? Three is, how does this, does acts like this, because some people even ask this question, okay, you do this thing, how does this change anything for that person who lives next to that river every day? So, you know, sometimes is this all this some way for us to feel much better about ourselves, that we are more engaged with society and water? You know, is it, honestly, I think I'm just raising it as much about myself. I'm not trying to point fingers here, man. I'm raising it as much about myself. Is it just some, way of reaffirming social consciousness of sorts? And if it's not, then what is it? Then what should it be?
This morning's session, Mr. Arun Shourie spoke very much about the quality of persistence. That it's so easy to throw up our hands and say, oh, nothing's going to change, nothing will ever change, so we don't do anything. I think that is a far more dangerous approach than saying, we will do something. I personally, as an artist, I believe that art can change things in maybe they're minute shifts, maybe they're little shifts in people's minds and not in everybody's mind. So rather than sort of saying that I will give up doing that, I think the better answer is that I will do it. Does the art speak to everyone? I don't know. I mean, when people say, so but what does your art do? I can only say, I don't know what my art does. I can only tell you what I'm trying to do with my art. And in that sense, public art art exists in many levels. I'm a studio artist and I enjoy making art. But with public art, you're actually taking art to the people and saying, if you won't come to us, we come to you. And public art is really not about beautification. It's not about beautifying a place, but about changing the dialogue of that space and of trying to get people to look at that space differently and to engage with that space.
My question is, who are the participants in that dialogue? That's my question.
It's anybody who chooses to come and anybody who chooses to engage with it, Krishna. It does not have to be, public art by definition is there for you to go and engage with. Now currently there is an installation we've done admittedly in the external spaces of a gallery in Kochi about gender. But the doors are open, the people can come in, anyone can come in, there's no ticket, they can come in and engage or not engage. I think it's also problematic if you say everybody has to engage.
No, I don't think I'm saying everybody has to engage. I'm just saying that the idea of engagement itself has a certain layering to it.
Absolutely.
And if you don't, as artists, also address that, just say I have the doors open, nobody needs to pay. I mean, this year the Hindu is charging, okay? But last year the Hindu didn't.
They don't charge.
Not charge 100 rupees?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, they don't charge anymore. Sorry, I take it back. Cut, forget it, edit it. Okay. Faux pas, take it back. Okay, you don't charge, it's free. But at the same time, who comes into this space is a complex question. You could always say everybody can come in, but everybody is not going to come in. Right? Everybody is not going to come in. So I'm just wondering that negotiation. It's a kind of an interesting negotiation. So the idea of the public space, how public is the public space, who enters multiple public spaces. These raise very interesting questions about the idea of public space, because we presume the moment we say public, it is access if one chooses. But it's not as simple as that, is it? Ravi, you want to take a shot at that?
No, can I also say that,
sure.
as Ravi says, it's a layered response. You can't have one answer for every member of the public, can you?
No, I'm not saying you do, but
some kind, again, with art, some art is, it's showy, it's knee-jerk, it's activist. Some art, which is not, I'm not saying any of these is a negative. Some art is more thoughtful and requires maybe a thoughtful, exploration of it. And I think the answer is not to say that art is elitist, but to say that art is layered, and different kinds of art, like different kinds of books and different kinds of music, will speak to different kinds of people. Well,
I didn't say art is elitist. I said something else, but that's okay.
I think all space is social space. So that's the first starting point. And in this case, every space has a site specificity to it. This particular site we chose was for certain reasons. Also, to make visible to multiple kinds of power structures there are also. So every site has its own social politics, and there is no sort of common idea of public space in a sense. And we're very conscious of the idea that we are dealing with kind of what art does is what other disciplines don't do. It opens up imaginations and relationships, and is not bound by disciplinary boundaries. So I cannot say the same thing when I'm talking as a scientist to about water or as an anthropologist, but through art, the artist, a good artist has the capacity to actually communicate, and who knows it better than you. So there is a very particular role for the artist in society. And let's say you're first a citizen, then an artist. That's my position. And in that space you operate. And you are operating in multiple levels. So this was one attempt. And of course, finally we had it in the Lalit Kala because of the intense politics of the space which we sort of spurred on for some reason. So.
Thank you. Can we take questions?
Very briefly, because there seems to be some kind of misunderstanding about the place. That's what you said before. It is not me, it is not the group who worked there that chose the space, but this space was given to us first by a principal secretary of government, and later it was withdrawn by another
principal
principal.
of the government.
Yeah, it was not the same one, and we don't speak about numbers, about names, etc. But that is just to clarify this point. I have an interest, before we give it to the public, also to say that we should end up, in a sense, with a positive note, because somehow we should also know what to do. And I think it is really true that we should not only maybe reshape our thoughts and reimagining something, but also create a new vision. And if this town, if this city digs a little bit in its past and looks at all its Erie system and at the canals, and there is maybe a future. It's a completely different future from what we had in the past, but I suppose it is the only future. And actually I see really, as you said, I see signs of change. They are far too slow, but they are maybe a little bit stronger than 3 or 4 years ago. So let's do something about that.
Thank you. Can we take questions, please? Yeah, thank you. Oh, okay. We'll take about three questions. Yes, and if you could keep it brief, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Yeah, this is to the dialogue that happened between the two of you. I just want to say something. Because I was thinking that the role of art definitely cannot be denied, precisely because our subjectivities are so sundered. And in some ways we've lost the ability. I think people of our generation would remember, perhaps, that nature was very much part of your subjectivity. So someone cuts down a tree, you feel it. And you have a situation where that kind of connection, for different reasons, and most importantly the kind of capitalism that we actually live through, happens. So in some ways the urban poor are also, increasingly being taken away from that kind of subjectivity. It's hard for them to share that.
And your question is?
So that's a question. It's not a question, it's a comment.
Oh, it's a comment.
And it's a comment because I want to kind of defend Parvati against your provocation.
Oh, okay. You're being defended, okay.
Because I think she has a point there, because the urban poor also suffer from the kind of alienation, maybe to a different degree. So they also need art in a large way, because art alone, and it's for no reason that in poetry, the greats in our country expressed the ideas of social equality, etc. in poetry, because metaphor is the way that you actually mend subjectivity. So I think maybe, to you I would say that maybe one should think about co-creating art with communities.
Thank you very much.
That's it.
Thank you. Question, please.
I'm sorry, it need not be a question.
No, can we do one thing? If it's a conversation, could we do it a little later?
No,
short for time.
No, please, it's a democracy. I want to attack you.
This one.
I want to attack you.
I'm moderator here. You could attack me later. We could.
No. Why don't you consider me? Yeah. Okay. What you said to Mr. Helmut, yeah, you are a foreigner, and we should all feel ashamed that a foreigner is coming and doing some work in India, and no Indians are not doing it. He has spent about 5-6 crores, whether it's funded or not. Okay? Sorry? Oh, not funded or not. All the micro and macro inventions are made by foreigners.
Okay.
And the first dictionary was written in Tamil was a foreigner.
Wonderful.
And the Gutenberg is the one who got the printing machine, and we have a festival here. Don't accuse Europeans, yeah?
No, one second.
And don't take it as a joke. You know, they are doing a lot.
No.
Please, you do something.
No. I want to presume that other people are not doing anything would be extremely erroneous without actually know who's doing. But I think Helmut understood what I said, and that's more than enough for me.
Hello,
Next question,
sir.
please.
Yeah.
Thank
Our
you.
all civilizations are emerged from the rivers, and so sometimes some festivals and celebrations making more garbages in the river banks. And so how can we make a smooth relation between culture and nature to protect rivers? And one more question, especially in the case of Ganga River, there have some Ganga Pollution Protection Council something gaps.
Yeah, I think Ravi is well placed to answer this, but I just want to make one point which tangentially touches on what you say, is that I think when we speak about culture and speak about its relation to place, and we're talking about it in the context of the Kuam and the Adiyar, please do not imagine for a moment that the people living on the banks in the middle of that filth have, this is, I think it is presumptuous, and I think it's also, I think it just smacks of a kind of elitism to even believe that, that they're doing this out of some choice. Yes, there are problems with resettlement. Yes, Perumbakam, which is where they're taking them, putting them is really far away. It's infrastructurally problematic. There are demands, financial and others, that are being made. But I don't think we need to, take a position in one extreme or another. But I think there is something like a universality of, the truth is that I don't think people who live at least in these places choose to live there. So I don't think this is something that we should either romanticize or celebrate. I think we need to find solutions which may be difficult in some respects, but I think it needs to be collaborative, and I think you need to have something that takes their opinion into account and maybe better resettlement. But this idea that, people can live there, and there's disease, there's death, there's, living there is noxious.
But Mukund,
at least,
but that's completely agreed.
May not be the fisherman.
No, but Mukund, the only issue is, if you are looking at changing the ecology, the socio-cultural ecology of a river, then it is about recognizing that the people living there have a socio-cultural ecology which has been damaged by people like us, and which has been made into the situation by people like us. And therefore there is, I'm not saying that they have to, we are not any of us here saying they have to live in the stench, but if we have to recognize that we are the stench, and if you don't recognize we are the stench and then move them somewhere else, and I think that's a double whammy of elitism happening. That's all I just...
Yeah, I mean, I take that point. I mean, in 1992, this organization that I was a part of, one of the big debates was how much is the pollution in these four waterways created by the people on the banks, and created by the sort of inadequate sewage treatment plants or faulty sewage treatment plants which are letting out raw sewage into it. It's ironic that even today that debate is playing out. We have more sewage treatment plants now. We have better sewage treatment plants than we did back in 1992, but the situation is not improved. Now, I don't know what the scientific or the right answer to this. It's entirely possible that it's not functioning. If the Chennai River Restoration Trust functions as it's planning to, we're going to have many, many more. I think that answer will be settled. But yes, I agree. I agree with you that that they may have a social and cultural right to live there, but not in the way it is. I don't think that's the point.
I think part of the problem is the we and them, and I think the fact we can think we can find a solution is the problem. We cannot find a solution like this. It's really, you have to go. It's becomes such a complex, integrated problem that it's a bit like gender. It's everywhere. So even spaces are considered constructed through gender. Everything could be gendered. It's the same thing with nature. It's been so integrated in the way we think about it and we treat it that we find that starting from now, we'll put a sewage treatment plant and the river will be clean. The Ganga is more dirty than ever. The large CPCB report says that after all this money spent, it's dirtier than ever. So now we are building, transport corridors on it.
Especially in the garbages also.
Yes, it's getting dirty in the upper Himalayas as well. So I don't think that we have a right to think that we can even think of an answer like that. We need to think. The book is just about rethinking everything we know and rejecting it and then finding out what's really going on.
Well, we'll have to wrap, and maybe you can take it off because he's already shown you the board twice. I'd like to thank Mukund, Ravi, Helmut, Parvati for a very engaging session. Thank you all. Thank you.